Within the company, we have what is called network security responsibilities, which ultimately all responsibility is going to belong to the CEO, or to the senior management. If it's a board of management, if it's multiple people in the management board, so ultimately they're responsible for everything. Then we have what is called the security management, which in general is the security information, is the CISO, so is the information security officer, which the information security officer is responsible for providing guidance to the senior management and defining security policies. Like the CISO is responsible to let the senior management know that based on their company profile and assets, they're vulnerable to specific attacks, which end up in specific losses to the organization, and then is also going to provide possible countermeasures and specify which countermeasure lowers the risk by which level, and which countermeasure costs, how many money or how many resources, because the total cost of a countermeasure is not only money. It can be resources, it can be it can be physical resources, or it can be human resources, for example. That's the scope of the CISO. Also, we have security staff, which is responsible for actually creating the security policies as defined by the security management, and it's also responsible for implementing those security policies. And what that means is to provide awareness to users, education and training to users, and periodic quizzes. Like, for example, it values 0 in the end to implement a security policy that in the end the users not being aware of that policy, not being educated and constantly trained what to do and not what to do, and to make sure that the users have understood how to function at work, you don't do quizzes. So ultimately you have to bring awareness to users, like how should they behave, what they should do, what they should not do, how should they obey with the security policies, how should they use the systems. So that's awareness, education, and training. And in the end, to make sure that the users are going to be able to respond appropriately when something happens, you need to constantly give them quizzes to see that they have understood what should be their response in a specific use case. Like if somebody calls them to ask for their their Windows account credentials, will they give those credentials over, or will they not give the credentials at all, or will they first ask for the information to the caller before they provide that information out? So that's basically has to do with the security policy, but a user has to be trained to be able to follow up on the policy. And then, of course, end users are responsible for being conformed with security policy, so embracing and taking note of those policies, and of course being part of the trainings and the education being given in order to be able to behave appropriately. Now, for the end users, most of the responsibility should be automated and transparent if possible. Because let's take like any department, let's take the finance department, let's take the legal department, let's take the logistics department. First of all, those employees and those users are going to have a hard time understanding the whole security scheme of things and those concepts. So you have to go to the users with non-technical terms, explaining them how to work and what to behave with words on their understanding. And I was saying that most of it has to be automated, just to first of all, to make sure that the users are going to obey to that, because users tend to forget or tend to take the easy way of doing things. Like, for example, it doesn't matter if a company security policy says that we need passwords we need to create secure passwords or complex passwords which need to follow up on the following guidelines. minimum X characters, you know, capital letters, small letters, special characters, and everything like that, that's worthless unless the policy is enforced. So if you give the user the chance, even if the policy is in place, if the system allows the user to put a weak password, that's the first thing the user is going to do. Because in general, users forget those things, and because they don't want their life to be complicated, right? So you have to enforce those policies. So that's going to be to enforce the policies, not only to train users. Likewise, the user should be trained to know how should they create the password. Because the system is just going to tell that the password is not good enough, it's not complex enough, but it doesn't tell them what to put in the password. So then the training is responsible for that portion, to tell the users, hey, to create the password, use this method. It has to contain this inputs. Well, likewise, for example, other kind of countermeasures which are conform to the security policies and should be automated and likely transparent is, for example, if you implement data on X control at the network, which means each connected device has to be authenticated to the network before getting authorized. So at that point, let's say that your 802.1x configuration, authentication configuration, relies on username and password or on certificates. You don't want the computer to pop up on the user to ask him which certificate do you want to use to authenticate to the network, or which username and password do you want to use to authenticate to the network. Because the user is going to start calling the help desk saying, hey, the system is asking me for this data, what do I put in there? Because he's gonna basically like freak out, not knowing which of the credentials should he put in there, or being scared of not putting the wrong passwords, or believing maybe somebody attacks his computer. So most of the countermeasures from the end user, regular user's point of view, should be transparent if possible, and should be let's say enforced, not to allow users to do bad things in the network.